Hello class and welcome to week 11 of the course. Today we're going to talk about two things, portfolio assessments, and also at the end of this lecture I'll be giving you some instructions for the Fieldwork 2 paper, which is the classroom observation. So be sure to hang on until the end. I'd like to start by talking about what is a portfolio. The main thing to understand about a portfolio is that it's a purposeful collection of student work. So it's not just random papers that you pull together. It has to be a thoughtful process, and it has to include both you and the students. There are four kinds of portfolios that your text talks about. A celebration portfolio is generally used when, for example, you have a parents' night and you're inviting them in and you're culminating a unit. You want the parents to see what a good job they've done. A competence portfolio documents progress towards standards. So if you have standards that you have to show, then a competence portfolio is what you could use to say the student has met this standard. For example, a math multiplication standard. Growth portfolios are often used through longer periods. Some teachers use these through a whole year to document progress and growth while in the classroom. And finally, a project portfolio might be shorter lived. It might, for example, be one specific project. For example, if a middle school teacher is teaching a unit on the Civil War and has assigned a project to the students, and that's a shorter term portfolio. Depending on the purpose, students may be involved in establishing criteria of what to include and how to evaluate what is included. It is possible for a teacher to completely select and evaluate the work, but then it becomes less of a valuable learning experience for the student. A more valuable learning experience is when they get to conference with the teacher about what work they're proudest of, and also they get to help analyze how good the work is. There are some advantages of portfolio assessment. They became very big in the 90s and early 2000s for these reasons. First of all, they're easily integrated with instruction. I hope you took the time to watch the two videos that showed two very different grade levels, one preschool and one middle school, and their use of portfolios in the classroom. They encourage student self-evaluation if you do them correctly. So students get better in evaluating their own strengths and weaknesses. They learn how to set goals and evaluate progress towards goals. And overall research shows that the use of portfolios in the classroom may enhance motivation. They're also great tools to communicate with parents. Parents love to see this type of work coming home rather than just report cards, because it shows parents concrete examples of what students are capable of. They're also great tools to use at student conferences with students present or even without students present, and they demonstrate to parents growth over time. Of course, just like with everything else we're learning in this class, there are disadvantages. Portfolios, for example, are very time consuming. You have to give a great deal of thought to how to create them, what to include, and you have to conference with students to provide feedback. Also, they're a little less reliable than some of the other things we've been using, such as tests and quizzes. So it's very difficult to remove your ideas about the student from the portfolio, and we're all human, so those ideas play in. You might grade a good student better, you might grade a struggling student harder. And then finally, careful planning is required for portfolios. If you don't plan carefully, a lot of times what you'll get is just a haphazard collection. If you do decide to use portfolios in your classroom, what are the considerations that you need to think about for assessing the portfolios? Because it's not just enough to put it together. It needs to be, because it represents a large quantity of time or a large number of student papers, you need to figure out a way to assess it. And the first thing you need to think about is, as always, is this formative assessment or summative assessment? To review, formative assessment is that assessment that's ongoing that you use to direct and monitor instruction. So for this purpose, you need to identify the learning targets, as always, um, that the portfolio will assess. And then you need to figure out ways, often through rubrics, that that you'll be able to give a score or assess or give feedback. A lot of times you can do this through conferences with parents. Um, a lot of times you ask students to do this to help assess their own work and then to communicate that to other audiences. Many times, though, the purpose of a portfolio is to provide summative assessment. So grades that you're giving at the end of a unit, at the end of a marking period, at the end of a year. And this is very important then that you have a summative rubric in for your portfolio. You also have to think about planning the physical structure. A lot of teachers will keep portfolios in simple manila folders or envelopes or boxes, but you can also get a number of good online portfolios that are available. If you go to the internet, for example, and Google electronic portfolios free, you should find a number of resources for teachers that would enable you and your students to keep electronic portfolios online. The other thing you need to do then is to think about what will go in the portfolio. Usually this is student work, but you also need to think about specifically what pieces of student work. How will you score it? Rubrics, self-reflection. You also need to establish protocols for format. So will you have a table of contents? How will students keep their papers? Will they be in plastic sleeves, etc.? And throughout your year, you need to plan for conference time. A lot of times what teachers will do is they'll say, Friday morning, for example, for an hour, I'm going to conference with students on their portfolios. Make it a regular part of the school week. We come back to who evaluates a portfolio assessment. Um, Again, the students should be involved with this. So when they're writing their self-reflections and they, for example, they want to include a piece in their portfolio, you might require that they write a paragraph to defend why they selected that piece for the portfolio. Teachers need to evaluate the content, the structure, the individual entries, and the entire contents. And then finally, the assessment must be discussed during student-teacher conferences so that students can have a good grasp of what they've done well and areas they may need to work on. We discussed a little bit electronic portfolios. Um, the electronic portfolios provide flexibility. It obviates the need for physical storage space, and a lot of times our classrooms are crowded as it is. It's also a great idea for students who are digital natives to begin to use these types of formats to collect and store work, which they'll do more and more over the course of their lives. It's best for certain types of portfolios. For example, it's great for a celebration portfolio. It's not always the best for documenting growth. So that was a quick introduction to portfolios. Hopefully you'll go on to read the chapter. But to summarize, portfolios are distinguished from collections of work in that they are purposeful. They're not just thrown together. They're planned. They vary in form and in purpose. There are 4 types that we talked about: project, celebration, progress, growth. Rubrics may be used to assess student work and portfolios, but students should be involved with the planning and assessment of their portfolios, and this usually occurs during student-teacher conferences that occur regularly. You should provide students with guidelines about what they have to do and how to select entries. And finally, portfolios are rewarding for both the student and the teacher, but they are labor-intensive for teachers. Let's spend a minute now talking about your Fieldwork 2 classroom visit. This is your last fieldwork, and so what you need to do is to plan to visit the school. It can either be the same school where you did the interview or a different school. one or more classrooms for at least 6 hours. During your time spent observing and or assisting in the classroom, record field notes in which you describe diagnostic, formative, and or summative assessments used by the teacher. Other things to consider are targeted learning goals or standards. So the important distinction between this field work and the last one is the last one you were interviewing a teacher or administrator to find out what he or she thought about assessment, how they used assessment in the classroom. This one, you're really trying to see assessment in action. So you shouldn't plan to go in when there's no assessment going on. You should plan to go in perhaps once during a regular lesson so you can see how the teacher uses questions to assess students, once during perhaps a grading and a feedback session. So you really want to try to capture all forms of assessment, formative and summative. Once you've completed your observations in a short paper, 4 to 6 double spaced pages, discuss the following. First, give me some background information on the class, grade level, location, types of students, how many students, for example. And then discuss the use of assessment in the classroom viewed from the lens of what we have studied in the course. Use readings to support your analysis, especially the text readings in the lecture. Some things on which you might want to comment. In what ways were your experiences similar to or different from your prior ideas on assessments before diving into the meat of this class? So many of you came into this class with fairly basic understanding of assessment. And so how has what you've learned in this class played into what you saw going on in the actual classroom? Did you see the teacher using standards? In what way? You might have a discussion with the teacher after a lesson. What standards did this tie into? Did you see formative assessment going on? Did you see questioning going on, or exit slips, or homework, or any of the other things we talked about? What types of assessments did you see? And why do you think the teacher used this type of assessment? How is assessment done in this classroom and why? Did you see any accommodations being made for diverse learners? So these might include special ed learners who have IEPs, for example, or gifted learners who need to be challenged more. What did you learn from this experience? This is an important thing to reflect on. Don't leave it off your paper. Now, just one final comment. I did receive clarification. There is only a slot in TaskGrid Stream for one fieldwork paper. So if you haven't already uploaded your first one, go ahead and upload this one and use this as the fieldwork paper. If you uploaded your first one, don't worry about it. You've completed your requirement for TaskStream, and I can grade that. But if you haven't, I'd prefer that you upload this one. As always, I'd like you to be able to email me any questions or comments. And if you want me to take a look at your draft, please feel free to email that before you upload it. And everybody have a great week. Remember, we're off next week, so happy Thanksgiving.